So in The Economist magazine just this past week, I read it last night, there's a huge article specifically devoted, entitled, called Feeding 9 Billion People. It talks about the changes in diets and habits and so forth, and the challenges of how do we feed more people when we have lesser and lesser land to bring into production and lesser water. And so ultimately we need multiple new technologies, inclusive of GM technology, but others as well, to improve farm productivity in North America as well as around the world. So GM will play a part of that, not an exclusive role, but a significant part of it. And indeed, we've had a pretty substantial growth in genetically modified crops around the world, particularly in North America, but also around the world in the last decade or so, and it's had a significant impact on agriculture and will continue to do so. Yeah, so we got to be careful what you say whenever you read something. It depends upon what you read. If you read certain magazines, of course, you're not going to get that perception. You're going to get that in certain specific magazines. So over time, what's transpired is the consumers, particularly in North America, but around the world, have become much more receptive to consuming crops that are produced or foods that are produced with genetically modified traits. And the reason for that is largely these are very safe traits, safe crops, safe foods. They go through more testing than do conventional foods. So, consumers in most countries who are knowledgeable are pretty comfortable with it. It's particularly true in the United States, and I think Canada as well. And the reason for that is there's a high degree of trust in our regulatory system. The idea is that if we have a good, rigorous system for commercializing genetically modified traits and people trust in that, then they don't have to worry about it being in their foodstuffs. And indeed, that's the case in the United States. There are some countries around the world where, as I interpret it, essentially they have lesser trust in the scientific process that is involved in commercializing genetically modified traits. And as a result of that, they raise the flag and sometimes exhibit concern about consumerism with respect to genetically modified crops. So over time, I suspect it's a matter of putting greater scientific integrity into the commercialization process, which will improve consumers' trust elsewhere in the world. The necessity, lots of technology is a necessity for agriculture. This is an example of one technology that is pretty effective and will continue to be effective. And so, if without the technology, I think food prices and crop prices would be even higher than they are, and we'd have even greater volatility than we're experiencing today. So, this is a big challenge, making biotech affordable. Certainly if you make a biotech technology and it's not affordable, it's never going to be adopted, so that's a challenge to the inventor of the project. I would say, if anything, there is quite a bit of biotechnology research occurring elsewhere in the world, particularly in Australia, India, and China. And I suspect they're inventing ways of creating biotechnology traits for multitudes of crops that may become very, very affordable in the production process. I'm not directly involved, but I read enough to know that that's the case.
What do you think, what are some of the challenges? What do you think some of the roadblocks are in adopting this? Is it just perception?
I think there's a couple challenges. One, from a technology perspective, it's a very costly technology, and you need very, very large acres to justify those types of expenditures. We are now confronting going from the major crops, corn, beans, to some of the food crops, wheat and rice. And once we go beyond that, we're going to be in more and more minor area crops, which means that the per unit cost will be escalating. That's one challenge. The second challenge, I believe, is there seems to be a lot of intervening forces now in the commercialization process, even in the United States, notably on the subject matter of alfalfa, on the subject matter of Roundup Ready sugar, and more recently a high ethanol corn. And there's interventions in varying ways which ultimately have the effect of elongating the process of commercialization, raising the cost, raising the risk, and ultimately increasing the cost of commercialization. That's an undesirable outcome, and I think that's going to be not necessarily a roadblock, but it's going to be raising the hurdle for commercialization of biotechnology traits. The discussion was, I think the discussion that's very important is always having as a benchmark a scientific process that enhances the discussion and the integrity of that. Regarding compressing the time, I'm not certain how we do that, because development of any technology, whether it be chemicals or biotechnology or new machinery, takes a long period of time, and that will continue to be the case, I'm guessing, in the future.